Hi everyone, thank you for coming out. My name is Simon B. I'm an Operations and Community Specialist here at Monzo. And I'd like to welcome you all to our very first Investival. It is a huge milestone for us and we're thrilled to have you here. Collectively, tens of thousands of you have invested tens of millions into our business, and we are so grateful for that. When we did our recent ad campaign, which I'm sure some of you saw on TV and posters everywhere, we needed to come up with a new slogan. And what we came up with was, "You make Monzo Monzo." The reason we did that is because it's quite literally true. From investing, coming to our events, supporting us on social media, giving us feedback on product on our community forum, you really are so important to this company, and we are just so happy to have you with us. You give us the motivation and the inspiration to build amazing things for everyone. And just as importantly, you hold us accountable for things that you don't like and when things go wrong. Basically, you make us a better bank. We see Investival as the next step for our community so that you can continue to help us shape our narrative. So we see our community as an aspirational place that other people are going to want to join and be part of. And more importantly than that, it's a place for you to make connections, not just with us, but with each other as well. We've been on an amazing journey in the last few years, and I want to give you a sort of brief about what that's looked like for us. So I personally started at Monzo almost 3 years ago. And at that time, we had about 40 staff. Today, we are onboarding almost 40 new staff members every single week. And we have over 1,000 staff members total now. That's a milestone we just hit this week, literally. 3 years ago, we had one small office not too far from here on Epworth Street. Anybody go there? A few of you? Yeah, you probably remember it. We filled it up pretty quickly. It was not the greatest space. The toilets exploded a few times. That wasn't fun. These things happen. Since then, in the last 3 years, we've moved in London to bigger premises twice. The first time we moved, we were amazed that we had 2 floors. Now I lose track of how many floors we have now. It's like 8 or something. We opened a trial office in Cardiff. Since we opened that, the Cardiff office has moved twice to bigger premises as well. And most recently, about a year ago, we set up our first international office in Las Vegas. And no prizes for guessing what just happened there about a month ago. Yes, we just moved them to a bigger premise as well. So the reason for all these moves is probably something you're aware of: insane customer growth. It's really been amazing to watch. 3 years ago, we didn't even have a banking license in the UK. We had about 40,000 customers total on our prepaid card, which at the time seemed like an astronomical amount for us, because we always saw the prepaid beta as really a proof of concept for what we really wanted to build, which is where we are now. And I'm really happy to say that today we are onboarding 40,000 new customers every single week. And we just hit a milestone of 2 million customers. I think that's worthy of a round of applause. Can we get that? Thank you. So it really has been an incredible journey. And as investors, you've also been on a journey. Although it's a slightly different journey, really they're 2 sides of the same coin. And for anyone that's forgotten, a coin's like a small metal round thing that you pay with things with. Before we had Monzo cards, we used them. Your journey started with a very simple question. Do I think this is a good idea? And for those of you who invested in us very early on, a good idea and a vision was basically all we had. So you really had to put a lot of faith in us. But as rational, sensible investors who all read all of the Crowdcube documents, right? I'm sure you all did. With every milestone that we hit, whether that's 500,000 customers, 1 million customers, international expansion, there's a new set of questions that you should ask yourself. And I'm sure you do ask yourself. And really, they're all variants of the same question. And that is, am I happy? Am I happy that Monzo is delivering on what they promised? Am I happy that Monzo is putting policies and governance in place to make a robust, structured business that's not going to falter? Am I happy that Monzo is using capital wisely, listening to its community, and using the data that we have to make informed decisions? Am I happy that Monzo is learning from the problems that occur? Because problems will always occur in any company. The real test is how you react to them and how you make sure those things don't happen again. And am I happy that Monzo is protecting us from financial crime and really building a company that will last? Well, today, you're going to hear from some amazing people. And whilst it's all of our jobs to make sure that we can answer those questions and that we continue to ask ourselves those questions, today you're going to hear from some people whose job it is to make sure that not only can you say, yes, I am happy to all those things, but you can actually be proud and delighted at the job that we're doing. We got some amazing speakers coming up, trust me. So with that said, I just want to hip you to a few house rules before we start and before we get our amazing lineup of guests here. We have our breakout space downstairs. There's going to be live streams of different talks showing there. We have packed coffee in the house, doing coffee tasting. We've got some food vendors in the house, so you can eat. And we've got Crowdcube in the house, so if you have questions about your investment, then they're best place to answer them. Security and CodeNode staff are all trained on fire exits, and if there's any kind of emergency, they will guide you. Any general questions, we have a bunch of awesome Monzo staff. Look for Monzo shirts out here in the welcome area, and they can answer any questions that you have. We have male, female, and accessible toilets upstairs and downstairs. What else? Oh, yeah. So the day is split into blocks of talks. No block is going to be longer than an hour or so, and there's frequent breaks in between. I'll be up here to kind of facilitate that process and guide you. If we can make sure that we get you all back in here for every block in time, because once the talks start, the doors are going to be closed, and we may be a disruptive bank, but disrupting people's talks is not the one. So on that note, also, if we can make sure that phones are on silent when people are talking. Again, we don't want to interrupt people's talks. They're very nerve-wracking. And that's pretty much it. So before I wrap this up, a lot of people have worked very hard to get this event off the ground, but none more so than our community manager, Naji. So if we could get a round of applause for him and all of our speakers today, that would be much appreciated. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to Investival. Can we please get one more big hand for our Director of Governance, who's going to be kicking off, Susan Adams.
Thank you very much. I've got the headset. So I just had to pick up the clicker, which is very important and it's a very simple one, fortunately. It has a green button and a red button, so I think even I can manage that. So I'm Susan. I'm a lawyer. I'm the company secretary. I've worked in banking all my life, and I left it a few years ago because I was pretty disillusioned by it. And when I saw what Monzo was doing, I was really intrigued. And I called the company about a year ago saying, what you're doing is fantastic. It's in the interest of the customers. Have you got a job that I can do with my skill set and all my knowledge? And here we are, company secretary. For those of you who don't know what the company secretary does, they're a legal officer of the company. We have duties to the company. We make sure that the governance is well run, that the company is run according to the law, we deal with regulation relating to the running of companies. And I also, Monzo being Monzo, get to do a bunch of other stuff as well to make sure that the customer's money is safe, and that the company's processes and rules are well run. So I'm going to tell you today, or talk to you today, about how corporate governance works at Monzo, what governance is from a first principles basis. And I also look at it as trust, as really related to trust, because you as investors have trusted us with your money to make the company successful, and you really want it to be successful, sustainable, and safe as well, but success long term. Our customers want their money to be safe, and they want all the same things too. So all of these things that I'm going to talk to you about are things that the work that we do behind the scenes to make that trust well placed. So, Governance 101. Governance is really a toolkit for making the company run properly and safely and sustainably in the long-term interests of all of its stakeholders. Stakeholders means investors, customers, the regulators, everybody who might have the public as well, a legitimate interest in a company being run safely and successfully. So it covers things like risk, it covers things like our legal obligations, it covers things like our culture, it obviously covers our money. It covers how we deal with our liquidity and our balance sheet and our credit risk. And it covers, in addition to that I've mentioned culture, the wider thing of what makes Monzo Monzo, because we want to do all of these things and run the company safely and successfully, but we want to do it in a way that allows us to retain our culture. Our community is really important to us. Our customers are at the forefront of everything we do, as are all of our other stakeholders, including you as investors. So it's not a sort of dry legal thing. It's a thing that is at the core of making the company successful long term. And again, this is what I've talked about. It's about trust. How can you trust that we run things really super well and in the long-term sustainable interests of the company? So governance makes it really, really clear who can take decisions. I'll go on to talk about this in terms of our own governance journey, but who has the power to set the strategy? Who has the power to make decisions? Who actually is ultimately accountable for things? So you can see, and I'll talk about this a little more, when you start off with a small company of 4 people, everybody knows what everybody else is doing. It's really clear who can make decisions and who's doing what. Then you get 100 people. People can't talk to each other every day, so you actually need to have some clarity and some rules and some processes. And when I joined Monzo, some of my former banking colleagues said to me, "Oh, gosh, these startups, surely it'll be a bit like the Wild West." But it's not. You can't run a bank like that because we are both a tech company and a bank. And to be a bank, you have to have the confidence of your customers and your investors and your stakeholders. And to make that happen, you have to have rules, you have to have processes, and you have to have things that allow the company to run smoothly. Otherwise, you cannot have a long-term successful company. So, why is it important and why should you really care? I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? Well, I can come up with a few examples immediately. How many of you have had a slice of cake at Patisserie Valerie in the last few years? Yeah, I can see a few people. Well, as you probably all know, Patisserie Valerie fairly recently found a large hole in their accounts. Now, the dust is still settling on how that and why that happened, but fundamentally, the systems and controls they had around managing their money were not good enough. The board of directors didn't pick this up. And yes, there was fraud, but if they, arguably, if they'd had the right internal governance, the right internal controls, it shouldn't have happened. Governance also includes things like making sure our directors have enough time to pay attention to the business. And that's a key thing with Patisserie Valerie, because I note that I think the executive chair was on the board of 17 companies. Now, that's a basic governance principle. If you're on the board of 17 companies, how can you pay attention to what they're all doing? Secondly, Lehman Brothers. Sound familiar? Yep. Some of you may have seen the play. Well, a few years ago, I was lucky enough to actually meet the people handling the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers. This was getting on a while back. And I said, well, what's the one thing that really went wrong with them? I mean, obviously, there were many things, the huge liquidity issue, risk management, all of these things. But they said fundamentally it was a governance issue. The people running the company had no real idea or no ability to know what was going on. For example, I understand that they had, the number may not be exactly right, but around 2,500 companies in its corporate structure. And they found 2 people who were being paid 2 salaries by different companies in the group, and nobody knew. So basically, this is what good corporate governance should stop. People should know what they're able to do, they should know what the strategy is, they should be able to set it safely, and the board of directors should have clear oversight of that. And we're still feeling the repercussions of Lehman Brothers in many ways now today. Enron, again, everybody's heard of Enron? Corporate governance failure. Again, people regard it as an accounting issue, but I'll go on to talk about the structures that you might have, and their audit committee and their board of directors failed to do their job. So this is why corporate governance is so important. I would say that, I know, but it is. So, our governance journey. Well, I've been at Monzo for around nearly a year now, and even in that time, things have changed. But in 2015, we started off as a really small company, a bunch of people, a small number of people in a room, figuring things out and working out, a great plan to start off with a proof of concept and then start off with a debit card, prepaid debit card, and then potentially move on to a bank. The governance you need for that, when you've got a small number of people, is as I've said, fairly limited. People can talk to each other. Then, in 2017, we apply and get our banking license. Now, once you start getting into banking territory, it's a completely different kettle of fish. You have to have a full authorization from the Bank of England. You become accountable to the Bank of England, and the Bank of England starts, one of its fundamental requirements is that even a company with a fairly simple product range needs to operate as if it was listed on the London Stock Exchange, which there are, I don't know, has anybody here ever read the Corporate Governance Code? Yeah, okay. So you can see it's not something you can suddenly flick a switch on. It's a very long document with lots of rules and requirements about how a company should operate, from its board of directors, through its board committees, and its accounting practices. It is a big ask of a startup company. I should also say, because I think we're quite proud of this, as a bank with a full license, our customers also have protection from the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. This is not something that not all of the companies regarded as our competitors have. So it's, again, into the trust thing. Our customers' deposits are protected up to 85,000, which is a huge thing, back again to trust. So in 2018, I've got myself on the slide, first company secretary, and we start developing even greater regard to the corporate governance code, and we start developing the board. You'll hear from Gary later on, our new chair. He has the most retail banking experience of anybody I've met, and a huge wealth of experience in that, and that's something that will help us continue to deserve your trust and earn it even more. So what are we doing this year? Well, my job is to both make sure we're complying with what we need to do now, but also look to the future. I've talked to companies who've gone from a private company to a listing, such as WorldPay, and it's not something you can flick a switch on suddenly if you decide to go public. You have to start future-proofing now, and you have to have a track record. So what the Monzo team are now doing is trying to make sure that we are operating in governance terms across the board to listed standard. I won't bore you by going into exactly what that means, but if you are interested, read the Corporate Governance Code. It's a great read, honestly. But it means that we have to have a governance framework which is, probably quite formal, and possibly what much more formal than you might expect for a tech company. So this is what I'll go on to talk about really briefly, because I can see I was wondering how I'd fill 15 minutes, but here you go. So we have a board of directors. We currently have 8, and we're about to appoint a 9th, so our board of directors, their fundamental directors' duty, they're in charge of setting the strategy overall, they're in charge of the long-term sustainable success of the business, and they have a legal obligation to make sure that every single decision that they take is in pursuing the long-term sustainable success of the business and taking into account your interests as investors, our customers' interests, the public interest, the interest of our employees, and all of our stakeholders, including the public. So, they have legal duties. It's a pretty onerous job. And we do this. We have 8 to 10 board meetings a year. They run from, they are several hours long. It depends on the subject matter. And each of the decisions are fully considered and fully debated. And we have a clear governance structure for the type of matters that come to the board. So the things that come to the board, key matters of strategy, key matters of finance, key matters of risk. And I can assure you, and it's my job to make it so, that they get the proper information and it's fully debated. Then, underneath that, and this is in full compliance with the Corporate Governance Code, we have a board risk committee. So they advise the board on risk appetite and oversee the risks that the company is prepared to take. They do deep dives into major risks that Monzo faces, and they meet 5 to 8 times a year. It's serious business. Secondly, we have the audit committee, which has a huge role. Many of the things that went wrong that I've talked to you about were audit committee failings, if they had an audit committee. So they look at our annual report and accounts, they look at our internal audit, they look at our internal controls, they monitor our finances, and they do the heavy lifting for the board around finance and internal controls and financial risk. Then we have a nomination and governance committee, which deals with board appointments and also oversees the governance framework that I've talked to you about, including our subsidiaries. We have now subsidiaries, companies in the US. And once I used to work for Standard Chartered Bank, which had hundreds of subsidiaries worldwide. And once you start getting into that territory, you need to know what the companies are doing, and you need a governance framework. Then we have a remuneration committee, and that sets remuneration for the executive directors and the chair, and it also looks at the remuneration policy over the entire company and makes sure it's aligned with the culture. So the remuneration committee has a really important role in making sure that the culture and the remuneration is aligned with, our phrase of what makes Monzo Monzo. So that people who are material risk takers for the business, sorry, getting technical there, are identified and that their remuneration structures are appropriate. Then everything that's not dealt with by these are actually then dealt with by executive committee, which advises Tom as CEO on the day-to-day running of the business. And underneath that, we have an executive risk committee who considers from the team perspective, the internal perspective, the risks, and that feeds into the exec committee, the exco, and the board risk committee. And we also have an asset and liability committee, which actually deals with balance sheet matters, deals with our assets, liabilities, our liquidity risk, our credit risk, if we're getting boring. But we have all of this infrastructure, this governance, these processes, and this is to make sure that we actually deserve your trust as investors and our customers and stakeholders' trust. So, got it on the nail, 30 seconds left. Here we are, and this is what we're doing in terms of governance at Monzo. Thank you very much.